This is the wreck of the most famous ship in the world, Titanic. She lies 2.5 miles down in the dark and icy waters of the North Atlantic. For 73 years after she sank with a loss of over 1,500 lives, she lay here undisturbed and largely forgotten. All that changed forever on the night of September the 1st, 1985, when her wreck was finally discovered. Since then, a fierce struggle has raged over what should be done with this once proud ship, and more than a decade after her discovery, her fate is still not settled. It's a story of obsession, greed, ambition, courtroom battles, and Cold War intrigue. Its subject is the battle for Titanic.
On behalf of RMS Titanic, I would like to welcome you all on this special day in Titanic history. The arrival of the big piece in America, the Titanic, at least symbolically, has completed its transatlantic voyage. This section of the hull you're about to see is the largest piece of the Titanic that will, in all likelihood, ever be recovered.
This 20-ton piece of scrap metal has just arrived in Boston. It doesn't look much, but it was once part of Titanic's hull and has the distinction of being the largest object ever salvaged from the most famous wreck since Noah's Ark. Eventually, after cleaning and treatment, otherwise it would soon disintegrate, it will take pride of place in future exhibitions of Titanic artifacts, like the one currently taking place in a huge tent outside the World Trade Center in Boston. Here, artifacts from the Titanic are drawing the crowds. The public's obsession with Titanic remains as potent as ever. After viewing the authentic relics of the disaster, they can buy a memento of their experience in the exhibition's shop. All tastes are catered for, from an inflatable model of the ship, with iceberg, Titanic coal sweets, T-shirts, even silk underwear. For George Tulloch, boss of RMS Titanic Inc., the company that now controls the wreck, it's been a costly decade of legal battles and controversy. But now it seems the Titanic is finally paying off. For Tulloch, the popularity of this and other exhibitions justifies his policy. Exploiting Titanic's artifacts is the price we must pay to save her memory for posterity.
What I'd really like for the Titanic artifacts is that the public has more and more access to them every year. I think to recover them and conserve them and protect them in the courts is only a meaningful process if you're trying to share them with the public and with the future.
But the Titanic treasures on public display are, well, the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the 5,000 artifacts recovered are stored here in France at the conservation laboratories of LP3 in Cimer-en-Auxois. A lot of them have already been restored and will eventually go on to other exhibitions around the world. Many others, though, are still waiting for restoration. They are kept in conditions to stop them deteriorating, but for the moment, there is no money to do anything else with them. They have exchanged the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic for plastic tubs in French warehouses. For some people, this is the final absurdity of a recovery policy they vehemently disapprove of. Among George Tulloch's harshest critics is Titanic's discoverer, Robert Ballard.
It's like stripping the old lady of her jewelry in her grave. Diminishes the experience. So that's where I just think it's sad. Now, you could always go and put it back. Wouldn't that be nice? And who knows, maybe someday they'll finally realize that the ultimate experience is down there, and they'll take everything and put it back so people can visit it there.
The fate of Titanic's artifacts is a bitterly contentious issue. The free market solution is simple. Those who take the risks get the reward. In this case, a commercial salvo. But many in the profession of preserving the world's maritime heritage are worried about what's being done to Titanic's treasures. No American maritime museum has so far been prepared to exhibit the artifacts.
I think it's very important that where museums are concerned, there should be a standard by which museums and the salvors who work with them conduct their relationship. And that's really what all this argument is about. Why? Because the Titanic is an iconic wreck. If you can't get it right on the Titanic, what hope is there for wrecks which are less well known?
So how did Titanic end up as the object of such controversy, fought over for so many years? The story begins with the search for the wreck. For years, the deep ocean technology didn't exist to find and photograph, let alone retrieve objects from her. But by the 70s, in places like the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, sophisticated sonars, submersibles, and remote control vehicles capable of diving to immense depths were becoming available. So a few people began to think about searching for Titanic. One of these was Dr. Robert Ballard, an oceanographer from Woods Hole. With Ralph White and fellow underwater cameraman Emery Christoph, he started making plans. Ballard and Emery even set up a company together called Psionics to find the wreck.
Oh, I think it was, in my field of undersea exploration, it was one of those Mount Everests that hadn't been scaled. It was a technical challenge.
We needed to find something that we could get people interested in so that we could explore the deep ocean and develop the equipment. And so we came across what Ballard likes to call the Mount Everest of shipwrecks, the Titanic.
And we knew the technology was just about there to find it and to explore it. And we felt that whoever did this in the deep ocean was certainly the group with the right stuff, and we decided to be the guys to do it.
As it turned out, we owe Titanic's discovery, like so many other things, to the Cold War. Remember, this was the early 80s. President Reagan's policy was to fight the Cold War with economic muscle. Building up a 600-ship navy was part of the plan. The idea was to demonstrate to the Soviets that they couldn't win an arms race.
And on top of the actual military buildup was a psychological policy as well. While we were building the American military, so to speak, from 5 feet to 10 feet tall, we further added a program to make it appear to be 20 feet tall. And so, hence the hyping of Star Wars and of a number of other programs that have not come to light, but eventually will.
By the early 80s, Ballard's Titanic plans were stalled. Woods Hole wouldn't back him. His company Psionics had achieved nothing. Another team had already mounted 3 expeditions to find Titanic. So far, they hadn't found the wreck, but any day they might. Then Ballard had a brainwave. Why not get the US Navy involved in the search to show the Russians what they were capable of? Ballard was a reserve naval officer, had been involved in classified work, and was a friend of the Secretary of the Navy.
The Navy was interested in demonstrating that if anything got lost, it could get found. That if anything dropped into the ocean, the Argo Jason system has a 20,000-foot capability, which means 98% of the world's oceans. And certainly by developing this capability and going out and demonstrating its power by finding the Titanic, and not only finding it, going inside of it, I mean, they're technically very challenging things, that a message would be sent that America has a tremendous deep submergence capability, and beware.
That's what appealed to us. And so we agreed to let Bob, while he was engaged, after he completed a Navy mission, to use the equipment to find the Titanic.
But Ballard needed extra resources, so he turned to the French Oceanographic Institute, Ifremer, for help. They had worked together before. The French would go out first and with their new side-scan sonar find Titanic. Then on the second leg of the expedition, Bob Ballard would film the wreck with his US Navy equipment. For the French, it was a commercial gamble, to be paid for by selling the first photographs of Titanic. In the summer of 1985, with high hopes, the French began their search.
basically it ended up being 56 days of idle boredom. You would think that in that portion of the North Atlantic, having had 2 world wars fought in that area, the Atlantic convoys, in 56 days we did not see one piece of man-made material.
The French had searched nearly 80% of the agreed area and had found nothing. Now it was the Americans' turn. But first, though, Ballard had to complete his secret Navy project. This mission, only recently declassified, was to find and photograph the USS Scorpion, an American nuclear-powered attack submarine that had sunk off the Azores in 1968 in mysterious circumstances.
They put in the money for Ballard to test the camera system on the Scorpion, and then if there was time left, and we all, wink wink, knew that there was going to be time left, we were going to get to go spend, say, up to 10 days trying to photograph the Titanic.
After completing the Scorpion mission, the Norse steamed to the search area in the North Atlantic. Ballard was going to search for Titanic visually, using the Argo underwater photographic sled. For 6 days, they found nothing. Ifremer's Jean-Louis Michel was co-leader of the expedition.
I have the watch of 0 to 4 o'clock in the morning. It was the quiet watch. On the 1st of September, after a long search, the man on watch on the Argo screen saw artifact.
Oh, look, yeah, you can see it on the other one.
Okay, we are.
It broke up, whatever it was. It was flat.
A little before 1 o'clock, Jean-Louis Michel sent Georgina, one of the watch officers, to my cabin, woke me up. I woke up Emery, and she says, we're coming across debris. Got to the control room, and all of a sudden we came across one of the 29 boilers that was distinctively from the Titanic.
And everybody around was very excited, of course. And the Argo leader asked somebody to wake Bob Ballard.
Bob Ballard just came roaring in. What do we got?
We're climbing this underwater Mount Everest here, and though we are physically not up there on the side of Everest being frozen to death and blown off and then standing there, it's on the summit, we're techno geeks. And so this is one the techno geeks have won, and we're pretty excited about this.
Everybody erupted in euphoria, and in the bottom of my camera case, I seem to have 3 bottles of Dom Perignon for some reason. I don't know where that came from. But we all, just started toasting ourselves, toasting the mission, toasting the wreck.
But even as they celebrated their triumph, the seeds of future conflict were being sown. The French had been upstaged and were none too happy about it.
I says, and Jean-Louis, we found this together. And he says, will not be seen by the French in that way. You found it. I said, we are a team. You eliminated most of the area. He says, they won't see it that way. And they didn't.
The cause of the conflict was the Titanic photos. Even grainy pictures would make front-page headlines the world over. Ifremer had pre-sold their pictures to a French magazine. Ballard too had his own deal and wanted to get the images back as soon as possible. They agreed to release the pictures simultaneously in France and America.
We had 2 individuals, one from my team and Bernard from the French team. And a helicopter came out to pick us up. And we actually chairlifted them. It was pretty dangerous, actually. We got these 2 guys up in the helicopter, and they flew back together, each with their separate but equal materials, into Newfoundland.
J'étais assez excité.
I was rather excited because I was bringing photos which were a scoop, a little tired also, because there had been rather a lot of acrobatics, going from one plane to another, etc. But nevertheless, I was very happy to have managed to bring back these photos in the shortest time possible. I even remember that I took the Concorde.
J'ai pris le Concorde.
The major networks in our country put so much pressure on our director, who was really a novice, quite honestly, in this high-pressure game of breaking news, yielded and released the material before Bernard got to Paris.
Quand je suis arrivé en
When I arrived in France, the photos had already been published in the US, which means, in fact, well, you know what the media are like, they had become worthless in France.
sans valeur en France.
We made a deal, and we should have lived up to our deal. And that anger is justified.
And it wasn't only the French who were resentful. As the US media saluted a new hero, some of his colleagues were none too pleased at the way Ballard exploited the press interest on his own behalf.
Dr. Ballard's a damn good promoter. Without him, a lot of things wouldn't have been done in the deep ocean. He should just give a little credit to some of the people that are along the way helping him.
The Nore steamed home to a hero's reception, but the row over the pictures was to have fateful consequences for Titanic's future. For the Americans, especially the US Navy, Titanic's discovery was a spectacular victory in the continuing Cold War, and so deserved a victor's celebration. By the time the Nore returned to Woods Hole, the world's press were in feeding frenzy.
I mean, they had fireboats out there shooting water up in the air, and I've never seen so many satellite television antennas in my life. They were set up along the dock. A lot of excitement, but then there was this undercurrent of unhappiness on the rights for the pictures, and that clouded the reception a bit.
The fact is, there was no effort at the time to diss the French, but it's hard to compete with the United States Navy once they decide to really make a big deal out of something, and we wanted to make a big deal out of Commander Bob Ballard discovering the Titanic. And in fact, that was why we funded it, because we wanted the world and the Russians to know what we could do. So we declared Bob Ballard the Navy's bottom gun.
As Commander Ballard basked in Navy-sponsored glory, the French retired hurt. They would have their revenge. They knew where the wreck was and would return with an expedition Ballard deeply disapproved of. Meanwhile, there is a mysterious footnote to the Titanic story. At the very moment Titanic was being found, the Observer newspaper was breaking the news with its exclusive front-page story.
I mean, I've never actually talked to the Observer. I'd love to know what prompted you to write this story, because it actually was written and published before we found it, but it coincided to the very day. Maybe they have mystics on their staff.
The journalist who wrote the story was Alan Rode. He'd been tipped off by British salvage expert John Pearce.
He said that his contacts at the Admiralty had told him that the Titanic had in fact been discovered. And he gave me a number in Bath at the Admiralty to ring, and I rang the number, and they confirmed that it had been found.
There were NATO exercises going on in the area where we were working, and we thought we had a secure line. So we were carrying on conversations all the time between the control van and the bridge of the ship. And any ship in that NATO exercise could have heard our conversations. But again, they couldn't have heard them, you know, after the fact. So the fact that the story broke before we actually found the Titanic, that was just a lucky story.
Well, I have been told since that a British Oberon-class submarine had trailed the whole operation from the Azores. I'm bound to wonder if I wasn't used, and the Observer was used, in some kind of elaborate joke by the Navy, on the American Navy, in a way showing them that they knew exactly what was going on. And I've been told that much gin and tonic was consumed in the Admiralty on the day after our Observer story.
Commander Ballard returned to Titanic the following year to film it, this time with Alvin the deep-diving submersible. It was to be his last visit to the wreck. His achievement had made him an American hero, and his book and TV programs a wealthy man. After this second expedition, he announced that the wreck should finally be left in peace. but it was too late for that. Ballard had shown the way and moved on. Now Titanic, lying unprotected in international waters, was wide open for anybody to visit and exploit. In fact, her next visitors would shatter her peace forever. They included a TV company, Westgate Entertainment, and their approach to the wreck would set the scene for all future Titanic exploration. Westgate's aim was to make a program that attracted huge ratings.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to Paris's prestigious La Villette Center for Science and Industry and present our host for this international television event, Mr. Telly Savalas.
Welcome to Paris and to the adventure of a lifetime.
Return of the Titanic is still #2 in the all-time ratings in syndication to this day. Still holds that record. So as far as successful, it was incredibly successful. It aired in almost every country worldwide. That's how big the interest was in the subject matter.
You are passengers in tonight's voyage and will return to the Titanic. In a spectacular dive to the bottom.
So how did a TV company famed for its schlock shows get involved with Titanic? Simple, really. The French were still cross with Ballard. So to get back their investment, they were happy to offer their ships and their brand new submersible, the Nautil, to the right bidder. And Westgate helped pick up the tab. There was now a new member on the team, George Tulloch, who once owned a BMW dealership in Connecticut. The project needed investors, and Tulloch could provide them. No one then could have predicted that this shy-talking guy, who knew little of Titanic, would end up running the whole show.
Really, my involvement was just fate. I was asked to come over to France to see if I could help in the effort to recover the artifacts. And it seemed bizarre enough to interest me.
The 1987 voyage was a turning point for Titanic. Ballard had photographed the wreck, but otherwise left it alone. This expedition set out to salvage artifacts from the site, especially those which Jocelyn needed for his TV program, objects like the safe. This was not archaeology, this was show business.
You know, this is the actual assistant purser safe from the Titanic, which was restored by EDF. It's almost impossible to believe that it still exists.
And when we brought the safe up, it was not emptied. Didn't have a lot in it. It was a safe that was from the workers of the Titanic, people that were on board the ship being their personnel. It was like stokers and things like that. So they didn't have a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
Coins.
Old coins.
Yellow coins.
Yellow coins, we'll put them over here. Who's our coin expert?
The real treasures of the Titanic came up in a leather Gladstone bag, kind of like what the old medical doctors used to carry. Inside this bag was over 300 gold coins, $62,000 in banknotes, and enough diamond jewelry to open up a very presentable jewelry store in Beverly Hills.
What is that?
Probably banknotes, I think.
Banknotes.
I suppose. They're tied up. They're
I
attached
should
together.
recognize a Yankee dollar when I see it, but I don't.
A deck light made out of solid brass.
By the end of the expedition, Jocelyn's team had lifted 300 artifacts to the surface. The first item was the most important. Under Admiralty law, the first object recovered allows the company to claim exclusive salvage rights to the entire ship. Titanic's new owners were now a group led by a Hollywood TV producer and a former car dealer.
When we saw the god-awful display that was put on television worldwide, I just felt very sad, not only for the survivors who had to endure this, but their relatives, and of course the people, the memory of the people who had died in this terrible tragedy. Just have such a travesty of their memory put on worldwide television that way.
The bitterest opponent of collecting artifacts from the wreck is the Titanic Historical Society. Its headquarters are here in a shop in Indian Orchard, Massachusetts. Ed Kamuda founded the society 35 years ago. Behind the shop, he and his wife Karen keep a free museum of Titanic artifacts.
This seems to be all right, except we could... They call it artifact, we call it grave goods. What is there to see? A broken piece of china, somebody's pipe, you don't even know who it belonged to. I would rather see what we have here, which are pre-discovery artifacts, which are letters people have written, things that they have saved over the years that they wanted to preserve. We did not go down to the wreck site to steal something from a grave.
I took the job because when I saw what was proposed to save these objects, I thought it was the right thing to do, as did the team. And so, you know, it's within moments of joining the team, I was called a grave robber as soon as we started, and so that's a bit of a punch on the nose.
Perhaps there's a curse on the Titanic wreck, like Tutankhamun's tomb. The controversy over the artifacts was just the start. Before long, the team fell out, the attorneys moved in, and the writs began to fly.
It was lawsuit city.
Well, we sued Piaget.
Grimm sued myself and RMS.
Piaget sued Jocelyn.
I went after Tulloch at one time.
Jocelyn sued me.
There's been litigations of Harrison, myself.
And I once sued myself accidentally, I think, in the whole thing. So there were lawsuits flying everywhere.
The attorneys have probably made more money on Titanic than anyone I've ever met.
Lawsuits are part of the recovery of anything that's in the ocean, that's contested with so many different interests, where so much potential money.
I think the most important thing is just to get us the best pictures you can.
George Tulloch was the latest victim of the Titanic obsession. From 1987 to the present day, it has taken over his life. Reviled by many critics as little better than a desecrator of a grave site, Tulloch sees his role as the true guardian of Titanic's heritage. But it's an expensive business. Far from being a gold mine for Titanic Ventures, as the company was now called, Titanic was turning into a money pit. The expedition costs, the endless legal battles, and the expenses of preserving the artifacts meant money was pouring out and nothing was coming in. In theory, the salvaged items were worth a lot, but the public controversy made selling them a problem, and most of them had liens attached to them by the company's creditors.
Late 80s, I mean, obstacles were insurmountable for George. He wasn't sure he even had the artifacts. They were still tied up in France. He had partners that were going in every which direction. Nobody was in a cohesive unit. He didn't have any funds. Nobody wanted to put any more money into it. Everybody was disenchanted. And yet George plodded along. I have to give him credit for that.
By the early 90s, the Titanic wreck had had one other visitor, the IMAX Film Company. But Titanic Ventures had not been back in 5 years. It appeared they couldn't afford to. They had also not officially claimed salvage rights to Titanic in the courts. In this apparent vacuum, the Marex Corporation, a Memphis-based salvage group, saw an opportunity.
This goes back, I've got them going back.
Their chairman, Herbo Humphreys, was a very successful treasure hunter, whose speciality was Spanish galleons. Now he set his sights on Titanic. He assembled a team and hired a British oceanographic vessel to salvage the artifacts with a remotely operated vehicle. But as the ship steamed towards the wreck site, the original salvors, led by George Tulloch, fought back. They went to court to defend their rights to the wreck.
It was extremely exciting. We knew that these individuals who called us were involved in one of the greatest shipwrecks, one of the most significant culturally and historically in recent memory. and we felt that we were on the side of the angels.
We've been in court with commercial interests, the thrill seekers wanting to rev them. They don't care about heritage, and it comes out very plain in court. They don't like any intrusion whatsoever into their freedom to do as they will in the ocean.
The case was fought out in the Federal District Courthouse in Norfolk, Virginia, the favored legal location for American commercial salvors. As the Marex team neared the wreck site, Judge Clark had only a short time to decide on who was to be awarded the official salvor rights.
It was at the time a novel notion to arrest a wreck lying in international waters in the deep ocean in a federal district court in Norfolk.
Hi, any news?
It was very dramatic, though, for the participants because the Memphis group had a ship on the high seas that they were paying money for. Sure, it was very dramatic for Titanic Ventures, too, because they were very close to losing everything that they had done up to that point.
David Horan was a high-flying Admiralty attorney. The Marex Consortium hired him to present their case.
The judge determined, based on the testimony, that they had not been abandoning the ship, that they had been preparing diligently for the over 2 years since they'd been out there, and the only reason they weren't out there at that time was us. They said that. And I find that is to be highly exaggerative of their position.
Titanic Ventures won the case and were made salvors in possession of the wreck. That's how a judge in Virginia gave a consortium of American investors control over the wreck of a British ship lying in international waters.
And the judge ended up finding in our favor. We didn't choose to go there seeking to be the guardian of the wreck. The judge appointed us that because, frankly, the public interest demanded that there be a guardian of the wreck. Otherwise, it's just open for looting.
It was disappointment, obviously. We felt that had there been more time, that the proof could have been presented that would have showed that Titanic Ventures did not, at that time, have the financial wherewithal to mount another expedition, that they did not have the financial wherewithal to really, that they owed a lot of money, that they hadn't even paid back the debts from 1987. Now, I didn't have any independent knowledge of that, and I don't want to state that I knew that for sure, but that was what we had heard.
I don't know how they afforded their attorney to come into court, much less mount an expedition. I think that was wishful thinking on their part.
It's cockamamie. Obviously, we had the money. We paid it.
Titanic Ventures may not have had much income, but thanks to artifacts like the gold coins from the wreck, they had some useful, if unusual, collateral to offer their creditors, among whom were Lone Star Casino, appropriate lenders perhaps in such a high-stakes struggle.
I think they got a terribly big boost from Herbo Humphreys. I doubt seriously whether they would have ever been successful had it not been for that suit that then handed them a sellable commodity, exclusivity. Once they had that, they could go out, get their funding, and go forward.
Titanic Ventures were in a serious financial situation. They needed several $1 million to pay their attorneys, to preserve the artifacts in France, and especially to mount salvage expeditions. So in 1993, the company was floated on the US Stock Exchange under the title RMS Titanic, Inc. The flotation brought in extra capital, but it still wasn't enough. It was time to sell one of their few assets. So RMS Titanic made a call to the Suarez Corporation in Canton, Ohio. This is a company that specializes in direct marketing. It's a multi-million-dollar operation that dispatches goods all over the States.
The project started out by receiving a telephone call in my office from a lawyer I knew in New York. Would we be interested in selling something from the Titanic? And I said, boy, it sounds really interesting. You must have some jewelry items, because that's what we are primarily, we sell jewelry items. And he said, no, the item we have is coal. And I said, coal? Are you serious? And he was quite serious.
RMS Titanic have always maintained that they would not sell any of the artifacts. Coal, though, was different. It was not man-made, and there was a plentiful supply around the wreck site. Vast quantities were recovered during the 1994 expedition. The coal was marketed by the Suarez Corporation for around $15 a lump. So far, over 100,000 lumps have been sold. Tulloch's next stop was Greenwich, home of Britain's National Maritime Museum. His aim was to put Titanic's treasures on public show. He had to, not just because that was what he had promised the judge, but because it was another way of raising money. It certainly raised a storm of controversy.
We wanted to do a high-profile, dignified exhibition which would bring the issues to the public. We also wanted to see if it was possible to work with enlightened salvors. And we also wanted to help them because we felt that if everybody turned their back on RMS Titanic, they would go away and sell the material.
The loudest protests came from other maritime museums, some of whom wanted to expel the National Maritime Museum from their international congress, the ICMM. Their president at the time was Richard Foster.
Well, the archaeologists, particularly I think from America and Australia within ICMM, were very concerned that this was not an illustration of the best practice that should exist between a museum and a salvo. We were not encouraging a good model. That was their view. And they lobbied very hard for museums in membership not to accept, if they were offered, the opportunity of showing those artifacts in the form of exhibitions.
We were concerned as to whether Greenwich had been able to achieve the right sort of protection for the wreck. Essentially, the salvors who have raised the objects say that they will protect the collection and will not have it sold at any time in the future. Equally, they say they've done the work to good or proper standards. In fact, all our research has shown that that is not the case. Initially, they did not have archaeologists on the site. They had never developed the archaeological plans or the proper archaeological reports. And these reports are very important because they will allow future generations to understand what the site was like before there was any interference and how the site has been changed during the whole recovery process.
Whatever the doubts in the museum world, the public's obsession with Titanic proved as powerful as ever. Greenwich's exhibition was so successful, its run was extended.
And I'm really just honored to be a part of this. I'm really proud that the National Maritime Museum has taken us on as their partner, and I look forward to the exhibit around the world and how much fun they're going to have.
With over 700,000 visitors, the National Maritime Museum had never experienced anything like it. But its success hadn't solved RMS Titanic's money problems. So Tulloch turned again to that master of marketing, Ben Suarez.
He needed approximately $2 million or more to do this dive that was necessary to keep his salvage rights, and that he had somebody suing him, and he wanted me to figure out, help him on how he could come up with this money. So I came up with this idea of the cruise.
So that explains one of the more bizarre events in the Titanic saga. In the summer of 1996, 3,000 holidaymakers in 2 cruise ships who'd paid $7,000 for the privilege, and some lucky winners of a beer company contest, arrived above the Titanic wreck site. The high point of the trip would be the lifting of the 20-ton piece of Titanic's hull.
This is the most organized. I've been on trips before. It's the most organized trip. I mean, it's informative. I mean, you're giving people 24 hours a day of information. There's been not 1 minute of boredom.
For the salvage experts too, it was a novel experience. Commander Nargelet has led the last 5 expeditions to the wreck site with Ifremer.
They wanted to be there, they wanted to participate a little in that expedition. And why should this be reserved for a group of experts who keep it to themselves? Myself, I think that everybody has a right to come, and everyone has a right to see what we're doing.
Amongst the cruise ship's passengers were historians, Titanic survivors, a Hollywood actress, a posse of TV cameramen, and an astronaut, Buzz Aldrin.
You know, I could use the same phrase to describe that setting down there that I used on the moon. It's a magnificent desolation.
I labeled it the Ghoul Cruise because, let's face it, what do these people really want to see? You're going down to pay homage to those people who died on the ship. I understand they had a mass before all this was done. And then you're going to lean over the side of the rail and watch a piece of the coffin being raised. I can't imagine what would be in the mind of these people to do something like this. It's just deplorable.
Well, honestly, I was trying to let the public participate in the actual work we do. And I think they'd be the better judge of speaking for our work there.
I think the Titanic deserves a particular level of respect and taste, just as you would treat anything, any disaster. It's sort of like picking up luggage from TWA Flight 800 and selling it. That's distasteful.
If we were bad, then so are our archaeologists. So we looked at ourselves as archaeologists. How do you finance these things? And the cruise was the only available means at that point to finance it. Why not let Titanic enthusiasts see firsthand the making of history? We saw nothing wrong with it.
In the end, the expedition failed to recover the big piece. Technical problems and bad weather meant postponing that project until the next time. Financially too, it wasn't the success all had hoped.
No, we put up $7 million for that, our company did, and we lost about 1.7 million on it.
RMS Titanic, good afternoon.
For RMS Titanic, public interest in the wreck was a double-edged sword. Rivals and predators were constantly looking for an opportunity to move in. It was a lawyer's paradise. By now, Hollywood had joined the parade. Shooting had started on a Titanic movie. Its director, James Cameron, was using a Russian submersible to dive to the wreck. Tulloch tried and failed to stop him. Meanwhile, RMS Titanic's financial problems showed no sign of easing. Despite a successful exhibition in Memphis, its share price had sunk almost as deep as its namesake, and its shareholders were up in arms. John Thompson is one of the disgruntled investors.
I don't know of a situation involving George Tulloch, the chairman of the board of RMS Titanic, that he has had a relationship with anybody that hasn't resulted in a lawsuit of some sort. It seems like he spends more time defending himself in legal action than he does even going to the site of the Titanic and exploring. And that's the real tragedy of this whole story. He has been sued by other people who have tried to go to the site. He has been sued by his own board of directors, who he summarily fired. He has been sued by the people who provided him with the capital to do what he is doing today.
And unfortunately, it's one of those things where you have to win every time. I mean, you can't lose, because when you do, it's over.
The legal battles continue. So far, Tulloch has seen off all his rivals in dozens of lawsuits. His latest coup has been to persuade the Norfolk judge to create an exclusion zone around the wreck and stop anyone except RMS Titanic visiting and taking photographs. It's hard to police. An Australian entrepreneur, using the Russian submersible, has already taken down Titanic's first deep-sea tourists, who paid £20,000 each for the experience.
But we do think the public's time is coming for the deep ocean. It just should be done safely. And in the case of Titanic, it should be done by us because we are the guardian of the wreck.
It's interesting to note, though, that because of the latest legal action on a part of the court, that Dr. Ballard cannot even return to his own wreck without permission of the salver in possession.
Well, you know, it's sort of silly, but that's America.
Meanwhile, the Titanic bandwagon rolls on. James Cameron's film opened across the world to record-breaking audiences. The film would eventually take almost $2 billion at the box office. History's most famous shipwreck produces history's highest-grossing movie. It has a nice ring. The shops are filling up with Titanic bric-a-brac. This Fifth Avenue store supplies the retail trade. Porcelain figures of Captain Smith, who went down with his ship, compete with musical paperweights and replica china. But nothing reveals the public's insatiable appetite for all things Titanic more than Titanic the musical. On the face of it, a song and dance show about a ship that hits an iceberg doesn't seem a good bet. Indeed, that was the buzz on Broadway before it opened.
Well, it's been remarkably successful, considering its rather rude acceptance before it opened, and even when it opened. The press was very angry with us for doing this subject. They were tempted with their all singing, all dancing, all drowning headlines. But the audiences took to it immediately, and then when it won all of the awards it was nominated for, it's just been phenomenal.
But now, as those exploiting Titanic hit the jackpot, and even RMS Titanic starting to see financial daylight, the fate of the wreck that fuels this bonanza remains as uncertain as ever. Fought over in court, mired in controversy, targeted by anyone who sees a chance to make a quick buck, the old liner has neither been left in peace nor properly protected as part of our historic heritage.
We have been lobbying for numerous years to get governments, hopefully the American, the British, the Canadian and the French in the first instance, to agree to an international treaty to protect the Titanic site from further exploitation.
The really important thing is that the wreck site must be sealed by international agreement. Until that is done, there will be no real end to the Titanic collection problem.
What I'd like to see for Titanic is for everyone to say, it was close enough to me. If I wanted to see them, I could have seen them. I want the public to see the fun of the different objects coming out of conservation and what poignancy or what meaning they can bring to people.
Many of the artifacts remain here at the conservation laboratories in France. With nearly 5,000 recovered so far, it's clearly not possible to display them all. A lot of people are worried about the future of this priceless collection.
Our concern is what may lie just over the horizon. If the company were to lose any of these legal actions that they're engaged in, the whole house of cards could collapse at any moment, and if that happened, a receiver, we fear, would put the collection to the market and this unique moment would be lost.
Titanic, her past and her future, is now a unique part of the world's maritime heritage. Maybe she has become too important to leave to the mercy of the marketplace. Certainly there are some who feel her wreck and her treasures should now be the responsibility of a museum, rather than the object of commercial exploitation.
Well, I think we have an opportunity in Belfast, the city which built the ship, where the new National Museum there is anxious and is prepared to talk to George Tulloch about a possible transfer of the artifacts to the museum so that they can be preserved for the public and for the scholars, and so perhaps they can be displayed too in a sensitive way in perpetuity, and that is what I would like to see happen.
To find out more about the story behind tonight's program, check out the To the Ends of the Earth website at www.channel4.com. Next Monday at 8, To the Ends of the Earth follows the man who is out to capture the world's biggest snake.